Welcome to
Urban Beginnings,
a podcast about navigating urban planning and its impact on community.
So, welcome everyone. I want to give a warm welcome to Ryan Thayer. Thank you so much for joining us today for these important conversations around equitable food systems. Let's get right into your background and experience. Hailing from the Bay Area, Ryan holds an MA in Urban Affairs from the University of San Francisco and a BA in Urban Studies and Planning from San Francisco State University. Ryan's career has centered around building power within communities and generating solutions at the community level. He believes that community food systems possess significant potential for overcoming systemic barriers to fostering healthy and flourishing communities, and his work in food systems emphasizes linking health and wellness directly to practices in caring for the land. He believes in the power of community food systems to deepen opportunities to strengthen community relationships, develop sustainable ecological practices, and promote economic empowerment.
In his role as a lead as a community organizer in San Francisco, Ryan established a comprehensive food justice program. This initiative encompassed the creation of 5 rooftop gardens in low income housing areas. The implementation of a fresh produce gleaning program provided employment opportunities for community members, and the co founding of the Tenderloin Healthy Corner Store Coalition, which played a pivotal role in launching the city's healthy retail program. Additionally, as a appointee to the San Francisco Food Security Task Force and the San Francisco Sugary, Sweetened Beverages Tax Advisory Committee, Ryan's efforts have been instrumental in addressing policy barriers with low-income communities. Woohoo! Furthermore, as part of an anti-poverty initiative of the Alameda County Board of Supervisors, Ryan helped establish a county-wide food as medicine network, and as the nutrition and wellness program coordinator for Marin County. He helped lead a county-wide collaboration on building community food systems from the resident level up.
Last but surely not least, Ryan currently serves as the executive director for Spaces of Opportunity, where he brings his undeniable passion for community food systems to Arizona. In this role, Ryan is engaged in impactful work surrounding his belief that we can develop a model for a resilient community food system, inclusive economy, and leadership development within a healthy community. His hobbies include traditional archery, which is super cool, and we hope to touch on today, basketball, novel writing, being in nature, and traveling. Ryan, your contributions to equitable food systems are remarkable. And before I give you the floor, I wanted to briefly quote you. You state, I believe that our relationships with the earth and our food can be used as a lens for how we can build healthy communities and sustain socio-political equity. I think that's a great segue into the conversation that we're going to have with you today. Welcome, Ryan. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me in that in-depth introduction. I appreciate it. That is nice to reflect back on the history that has gotten me here today. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And I know that was kind of a pretty thorough overview of some of your past and current positions, but we wanted to kind of give you an opportunity to touch on any of that work or to add any details that maybe we forgot that you might want to focus more deeply on in this conversation. So,
Yeah, no worries. Hey, we forgot AmeriCorps too, where we met back in 2010.
that's right.
But yeah, it's been a journey since then.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So I'm going to let Rogelio take it from here. So the floor is yours, Rogelio.
For sure. Thank you, Blair. And great to meet you virtually, Ryan. I like your shirt. For reference,
Me
he's wearing
too.
an Oakland Roots t-shirt. And, it's a soccer team based of Oakland. Yeah,
With me wherever I go.
so what's up, man? I just want to, start by asking you, what was your first experience with urban planning, and how that experience shaped like your academics and your professional pursuits?
Man, and I think like unconsciously it was more how interacting with the built environment, right? And I think I didn't really have an understanding or you know scholarly understanding of like what urban planning is and what that means and how that's impacted communities. um, but as the story unfolds, it just kind of clicked in place of that being an area of focus for me. I was born in Virginia, in Norfolk, which is a city, a port city that was kind of impacted by the crack era, and has roots in segregation and uh, largely, when I was growing up, it was black and white communities, and so the disparities between the two different communities was really clear. And so, having friends that were growing up in black communities and kind of seeing the difference between the neighborhood I lived in versus the neighborhood that they lived in, um, kind of started me to question like why'd that come to be. And yeah, Norfolk has a lot of waterways and railroad tracks and stuff like that. And so literally you cross a bridge or you cross the railroad tracks and you go into a completely different kind of dynamic of a community. And so that kind of exploration led me towards not declaring urban studies until my fourth year in college. Um, and so I was undeclared for my first 4 years, and it took me six to get through. And originally I was, looking more towards like ethnic studies and really kind of more focusing on how have we let inequities to be produced, so clearly across racial lines in this country. Um, and how can we address that? And once I started taking urban planning classes, um, my lived experience and what I've witnessed, and then also coming from more of a framework of like people power movements and community building through ethnic studies and social justice movements, of learning more about the history of that. Also moving to Berkeley when I was 12 and growing up in the Bay Area and being exposed to, the history of the Black Panthers and the hippie movements and all that just all kind of blended together of, how important our interactions are with the built environment and how also the built environment dictates our interactions, right? And
Mhm.
um, back and forth kind of give and take of that.
For sure. Thank you. Um, how did how did that like did you ultimately, like, through your path, like how did you how did you get into what you're doing now, which is, focusing on like community food systems and participatory planning? Um, can you kind of speak on a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, it all kind of just happened, honestly. Um, I never saw myself as a person like in a community facing role. Like I'm more of an introvert and kind of more a strategy kind of thinker, behind the scenes kind of person. And so going through undergrad and thinking about what my career path was going to be, I never thought it was going to be something that was actually out building and with
Mhm.
community and interacting with folks. My last year, I had a class that an ethnic studies class that ironically enough was at the same time that SB 1070, I want to say, was the number. It was happening in Arizona, and now someone who moved to Phoenix about a year and a half ago. It's like a full circle moment. Um, but that was if I'm getting the wrong number right, but it was a law that got put in place that required or that allowed for police to request, authorization or ID cards or rights to citizenships um, at traffic stops or what have you, um, and really create a lot of issues down here with a lot of brown community folks. And so he gave us an option that we could organize something around that, or we could write like a 15-page paper. And so the class came together, and I recognize in that kind of I had more leadership skills that are emerging and was kind of good at like putting different pieces into place. And that is actually what I decided to go to AmeriCorps, and as a volunteer and youth coordinator in Excelsior in San Francisco. and started realizing that I was good at coordinating groups of people and kind of looking at how can we did a mural project, and we're looking at how the design of it was more looking at an anti graffiti effort, and so using murals as a way to deter graffiti. And myself and Gabe, who I also went to urban planning with at SF State, um, we're like, well, it's the high schoolers that are the ones that are doing all the tagging. Like, let's bring them in and have them actually co-create these murals and have them participate in painting them and designing them. Because if they don't respect it, they're going to still tag it. But if they're a part of it, then they're actually going to take ownership over it. And that kind of kicked it all off. And while I was in undergrad, my brother had a landscaping company, and I was working labor for him. So starting to get more connected with plants. My mom was also a tree pruner, so working labor for her as a way of just trying to get through. And then as I was building out this kind of expertise, I guess, and working on a community level, I also kind of had a background in plants. And then another Lorenzo, who Blair and I did AmeriCorps with, was working for Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation, a low income housing developer in San Francisco, and they were hiring a food justice community organizer. And so I applied and got that job, and then that kind of kicked off my whole career around food. And looking back, it's always ironic with our stories. The middle school I went to in Berkeley, Martin Luther King Jr. Middle School, had that Alice Water sponsored garden and kitchen, and was one of the first public schools with an organic garden and farm, and working that into curriculum. So I had exposure to that. I also worked in a grocery store all throughout high school. And so, with that and landscaping, kind of all the different components of food system work has been since I was like 13. And so it all just started kind of picking together into the Tenderloin, which was really, where I started getting more involved. And I was there for 6 years, building out food justice efforts in San Francisco.
For sure. Thanks for sharing. When I met Blair, she would talk about the Tenderloin. I had no idea where it was. Um, you know, just having more conversations with her, doing more research, and her telling me a little bit about you and what you guys did in that community. Bringing, there was no grocery store, and just bringing like one corner store to the area. Like, it really made me think about or kind of where I grew up. I grew up in a like inner city. We had a few grocery stores. They were more like ethnic, like more of you'll find more traditional Mexican products. We had a Albertsons, but it closed down, and it turned into like a Superior, one of the bigger Mexican grocery stores chains out here. Um, but it was within walking distance. But yeah, but just looking at the Tenderloin, like, it's obviously more denser. Like, there's taller buildings. But it's more urban, and for that population to not have access to just groceries within like a few blocks or a walking distance is pretty sad. So I'm glad that you guys kind of took leadership and brought things to that community. So yeah, I guess, Blair, did you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, that was kind of a great segue into my next question. So, please correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, but the organization that you currently work for serves the South Phoenix communities, and I'd imagine that transitioning from working in the Bay, which is a dense urban environment, into a less dense, probably not urban environment in the South Phoenix area has been probably overwhelming. You probably have a mixed emotions about it. And so I kind of just wanted to dive into your current role and sort of a little bit about sort of working, how are you able to transition from working in like a dense urban environment to one that doesn't have sort of the same characteristics, but maybe some of the same problems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we can may earmark it for a point, but I think the history of food inequities and is also tied to a lot of the other inequities within the United States around redlining and disinvestment and exclusion from decision making and what have you. and also the rise of corporations and the power that get consolidated in supermarkets, which is really fascinating history. So when it comes to food, which is actually one of the really, I think, powerful pieces of using that as a lens to look at systemic inequities, the stories are the same, the histories are very similar of why certain communities have lacked access, to healthy food options, at least since like the 70s, um, is very similar. And so the dynamics that are facing the South Phoenix community, while is not the same type of demographics as in the Tenderloin. You have a much older population. I mean, there's higher concentrations of drug use and mental health issues, and people with mobility issues that exist within Phoenix. Phoenix is a trip, though. It's like everybody likes to say it's the fifth largest city, but really it's a suburb, and it's just sprawled and it's full of strip malls. Um, and each major road is a mile apart, and it's set up completely like a grid, and so you can take one road for like 25 miles plus and never turn and just go straight
Yeah.
across to one side, right? And so things are spread out very far. And so with what's happening in South Phoenix, Spaces of Opportunity, which I'm currently the executive director of, started back in 2015. We're a 20-acre urban farming project organization. We just formed as a nonprofit. I was hired as the first executive director in October of 2022, but it formed around
Congrats.
like a collaboration. Okay, right on. A collaboration of community groups that saw a vacant plot of land. So something that you would never see in San Francisco is a 20-acre vacant plot, which there's a lot of them out here, and started just reclaiming it and turning it into a farm. And it's school district owned land, that now we have a strong relationship with them. But at the beginning, my understanding was there wasn't really asking for permission. It's more of kind of the Wild West out here, and you just start doing stuff, and the policy and kind of practices might follow after that. Um, but yeah, I started, literally breaking ground, and the group of the founding organizations, started building out and expanding, and starting with one little community garden plot up to what we are today, where we have about 10 acres of farmer incubator plots, and so those are a quarter acre to an acre and a half. Are largely farmers that are coming from other countries, or which the USDA classifies as socially disadvantaged farmers. And the goal of that we're still trying to develop and flesh out is how can we provide the space, the technical assistance, and the capacity support to produce new farmers and then help them access farmland. Um, One thing that's often overlooked, I think, in the United States is that the way that the food system in the farming space got set up was largely with large scale multi generational family farms, largely white farmers, and there's a whole history behind that. Um, but what we're facing now is that those family farmers are aging out, and the next generation is not wanting to become a farmer. And so I think it's something like the average farmer age in the United States is like 60, 65.
Wow.
And their children aren't replacing them. And we're not really doing a strong enough effort of making sure that we're producing food. It's something that I think is really easy to take for granted. Um,
Mhm.
and the practices that are involved in that are also very destructive in a lot of cases. And so providing spaces for people who are in more harmony with the earth and are more looking at regenerative practices and building soils and not using chemicals, is really crucial, and is something that we really need to be promoting across the country. um, we also have 2.5 acres of community garden plots, where community members can pay a $5 a month fee to get about 200 square foot plot. And so we have 55 gardeners over a little over 200 plots. We run the only standing farmers market in South Phoenix. That's something that is also unique here because of kind of the sprawl. There's no walking traffic, and
Mm.
you don't really um, come across something, right? And so we're tucked away a little bit in the South Phoenix neighborhood off some main streets, and so if you don't drive down that street, you'd have no idea that there's a 20-acre farm, 2 blocks from your house. And so trying to have sustained community participation and engagement is something that we're continuing trying to build. And then we have a couple of demonstration gardens that are like desert edible plants and desert medicinal plants. We're about to start up an agroforestry training program that I'm really excited with to do trainings of cohorts of community members on caring for trees in hopes that we can start producing trees and like a labor force for addressing the urban heat island effect and getting more trees out into South Phoenix so that there's more shade canopy. That's a big disparity as well. And it gets super hot here. We picked the year that had the most record days of like 32 over 110 or something like that,
Yeah.
which is a bigger shift in the density. But yeah, that's kind of spaces and where we're at.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. You really hit on a lot of key topics. That was really wonderful. I think, for some of our viewers who may not be as familiar as us with the terms food justice and food injustice, what does food justice mean to you? And I know you kind of touched on this, and how is it related to food security or food insecurity?
Yeah, it's a heavy question, and I think food justice is one of those terms that, in my opinion, gets overused and misrepresented a lot. Um, it's not just the act of starting up a food distribution with the food bank, and getting food to people is not in itself, I would say, food justice. And I think that it's more tapping into kind of the legacy of the Black Panthers and their free grocery programs and free breakfast programs that were providing kind of more of a direct service, but was also creating space to engage and build community. Was also critiquing kind of the shortcomings of how society is failing, in their case in particular, the Black community, um, creating leadership opportunities and plugging in people and being a part of making change within their community. And so for me, like, food justice is really a framework of how are you kind of bringing together the intersections of different justice movements and different justice perspectives, and are looking at economic opportunities and restorative justice practices in the criminal justice system, education and training and schools, and it's kind of the environment, right? All these different intersections of different things all come together around the food system. But I think the most important component is in my opinion, it's more process orientated. And so it's looking at who's the impacted community and what's their role in decision making, and is power being built within the food system for the folks that are impacted. I think often approaches the food insecurity, which is the definition is that you don't, or the loose definition is you don't know where your next meal is going to come, or you don't have like the means to actually access that. Um, the way of addressing that typically is with direct services, like the food bank, which does amazing work, but is also hundreds of millions of dollars that are invested in it, that are also tax write-offs to grocery stores and corporate chains, that typically give substandard food and not healthy food options. But there's a lot of money and attention that goes into it, and typically the people that are facing the food insecurity have no say or no involvement in any of the process or the decision making, other than if they want to volunteer for the food bank. But it's a big machine that's kind of already set what the priorities are. It's already set what the strategy is going to be to address those issues, and is going to raise funds and resources successfully to do that. But similarly, with the planning process disconnected from the community that are being impacted and their role within decision making. To me, that's really the crucial piece of food justice, is that you're bringing people along. They're kind of the ones in the driver's seat. They're saying what the priorities are. Sometimes it's not food. When I was in the Tenderloin, there's single resident occupancy hotels, and those are like old time hotels that got converted into housing units. Some of them have the ability to have a kitchen or a microwave or a burner in their room. Some might have a kitchen on their floor. Some might have one kitchen in the building. Some might have wiring that's so old that if you run a microwave, the whole wiring goes out. And
Yeah.
so we were running a distribution program from the farmers market and collecting really good, Bay Area, California, local produce, all types of stuff. And we get, thousands of pounds, and we'd be out just giving out for free out in the community. I remember one time I had a whole bunch of eggplants, and I was like, "Hey, come get some eggplants. Take this out." And one guy walked by and he's like, "Oh, I'd love to have that, but I can't cook it, or and I
Yeah.
can't. I don't have a fridge, and I can't store it." Um, so some of the issues and the challenges that community members face are a lot more dynamic than just getting food to people. And there's the old saying: if you give someone a fish, they eat for a day, but if you teach them how to fish, then
Yeah.
they can feed themselves. And if they know how to mobilize as a community, then they can provide mutual support networks and doing all that. And so I think that's a role that food can play, and is really a crucial component of food justice.
Amazing.
Yeah. Blair. Oh,
Oh, she looks frozen.
Can you hear me?
yeah. Oh, she's out.
Nope, we lost her.
Probably join. She's probably join right now. Welcome back, Blair.
Thank you. Sorry.
You good?
Yeah, it's just the internet.
Or Sacramento.
Yeah,
Yeah.
got the quality internet over here.
Yeah. But yeah, man, I appreciate all the knowledge you're speaking right now, dude. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and one of the wild things with food systems, and I try to frame it more around food systems and just farming. I think that's where it starts with the earth, right? But then it branches out into all these other components. And so, from workforce development standpoint, the a report that came out like in, I don't know, 2013 or something like that, had the Bay Area food economy at $113 billion. And so, the existing economy around food is massive. Um, Pretty much across every sector is 50 to 75% controlled by three or four corporations that are very large. And so even, packaging and processing and cold storage and distribution, pork, meat,
yeah.
all that kind of stuff is held in very little hands. Um, but the money's already there. And so, looking at how that can shift towards, small social enterprises or micro businesses, um, that can get a little bit of that market share and transition it away from, those larger stores and what have you, or into cooperatives and what have you. There's a lot of opportunity that doesn't also require like new money to be invested or directed. It just needs to be shifted. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and farm labor is no joke. Like, there's a reason why there's not a lot of people trying to do it.
Yeah.
It's really hard on the body, and it's out in the elements. And so it's definitely not for everyone. Um, but the people that it is for, like, I think that's something that really needs to be honored and lifted up. The people that are working the land day in, day out. Um, is something that, from the urban planning lens, right? Like, cities exist around surpluses of food. And so without
Mm-hmm.
having a surplus of food, way back in the day, the ancient cities in every culture wouldn't have formed. Because if you're, focusing on having to feed yourself, you can't really put time into your master's degree, or in, designing a car or what have you, because you're trying to feed yourself and your family every day. And so being able to produce a surplus of food, freed up people to start thinking about different things and start doing different things. And that's, was really the crucial component of cities forming. um,
Mm-hmm.
and we take it for granted, and we don't really appreciate it. It should be something that's held at a lot higher value. in our society than it is. Um, and at the very least, just don't take it for granted. I think COVID really showed, how vulnerable our global supply chains are, and the current system really requires products to move back and forth across the globe on a daily basis. And working in grocery stores, there's trucks coming days in, day out with new products and new stock in the shelves. And one ship gets turned around in the canal, or some people start panic buying and toilet paper and all that, and all of a sudden the shelves are empty because we're not
Yeah.
set up to do that, and it takes weeks and months to recount for that. um, but yeah, we can build community around the land, on a local level. Um, I was shopping at a produce store in the Bay Area, and that had no empty shelves. That was thriving with produce, under peak COVID panic buying. You would go in there and have no issues getting everything that you need. So I think, from a resiliency model, from an environmental model, from an economic model, that's really the direction we need to be going.
For sure.
Yeah. I kind of want to bring the conversation back to the Tenderloin and talk a little bit about community engagement. I was curious how the Tenderloin, working in the Tenderloin, influenced your work, especially as it relates to participatory planning.
Yeah, I mean, I think I owe a lot to the Tenderloin and to the community who was there. And um, yeah, I cut my teeth pretty hard. I mean, that's a pretty rough neighborhood to be community organizing in, and a pretty uniquely circumstanced population, that faces a lot of barriers for participating. Um, and as a result, for people that aren't familiar with the Tenderloin is roughly a square mile. There's about 75,000 people, I think, or 40,000, no, 40,000 that live there, I believe,
Yep.
or at least that did when I was there. There are 75 corner stores within that square mile, when I was working there before we started the Corner Store Coalition. There's a lot of families, a lot of people from all over the world that live there. There's also a large number of seniors and elders, and large number of people who are living on disability, are needing to have some sort of a social service to get by. Um, Surrounded by the major tourist area in San Francisco, Union Square, surrounded by mid market that had the Twitter headquarters and high tech coming in, surrounded by City Hall, and where all the decisions are being made for the city, and it's a place that gets overlooked and discredited, and swept under the rug a lot, and decisions are never really being made in San Francisco's level, on behalf of that community, because it is so low income. And there's a lot of households that are getting less than $20,000 a year in San Francisco, a lot that are getting less than 15,000. And luckily, a quarter of the housing is secured by nonprofit housing that allows for some level of like housing stability. But the social kind of concerns that are wrapped around with that are huge. But yeah, I mean, that's where I really got my start with these rooftop gardens, and was organizing each building, and knocking on everybody's door and getting them involved, and what do they want to see have happen on the garden, what do they want to use it for, how's it going to be harvested, um, being involved with every aspect of it. And that was really, I think, eye opening, and a really kind of amazing experience to go up on a rooftop where all this food's being grown, and then outside there's all this drug use and drug dealers, and kind of grit and grime.
Yeah.
But then I think a real big piece is around the Healthy Corner Store work, that was just starting to get built, when I started, and then kind of just stepped into a co-lead on that, and built it out to what it started to become of what it is today. Um, but a group of youth, from the Vietnamese Youth Development Center, did an assessment of local stores, and did a large community convening. And at the convening, we had at least 100 people there. Um, they presented their findings, and they're like, look, we have all these corner stores and none of them have vegetables in it. And however many have tobacco and however many have alcohol, And so look at this map of all this stuff, right? And this is what we're living with. And at that, they're like, what should we do with it? And at that meeting, everybody was like, let's turn these stores into something good for us. Like, let's have it be healthy. Like, let's not run them out of business and try to bring in a Whole Foods or bring in something from the outside, but really see, because the corner stores are often also places where like people will give you a credit like until your paycheck comes and like will front you some money and you pay them back when you get paid, or they know your name, they know your order, right? And so there's like a sense of community around there. It's just largely centered around unhealthy options. Um, and so that really became where the corner store coalition started. And we really wanted to make sure that it was community driven and community led. And so our first thing, once we got some funding, when we hired a group of resident leaders who were in the community and representative of the different languages and kind of living situations that you see within the Tenderloin, and they became the work, right? And they were going out, engaging their community, doing assessments in the stores, connecting with the store owners, seeing if it's something that they'd be interested in doing, asking people what they want to see. And so through that group, which I really think is a strong model of having a group of leaders that can be trained and built the capacity of going out and engaging the broader community. I think often when you think of like community representation, we're want just one kind of token person is like, oh, you live there, you speak for behalf of the community. But really, and especially a place like the Tenderloin that's so diverse, it's like you need to get like 10-15% of the population involved in something to say you have community representation at a minimum. um, and so we really strive to do that, and we're able, when I left, we converted 4 stores into selling fresh produce, and their sales were going up, and more people were being able to access the produce that was being put into the stores. And so other stores were starting to close down some. I can't say that was a result of that, but we were putting out shopping guides, and we're saying the community wants to see healthier options. And so some stores were electing to start being more healthy on their own. Some were, we were being part of the conversion process and actually bringing them in equipment and like grocery expertise. um, and that helped create the city's program. And so now it's still a funded program, I think, in part through the soda tax funding. And then there's also actually a merged program between the Office of Economic and Workforce Development and Public Health. And so we're looking at kind of, we always talked about the 3 pillars of economic development, public health, and then community. And so that was really what formed the program, large in part to the thanks of Supervisor Eric Marr, who really did a lot of due diligence and connected with us, even though it wasn't his district, and really crafted a policy in a way that ensured that that operation of the community was like at the forefront of the way that the program ran, and it wasn't just something that became a citywide program and that made decisions excluding the community members, at least in the Tenderloin.
Word. Damn, Ryan. So let me take a little back to when you were talking about corner store and
I know I'm kind of
corner.
speechless, honestly. I feel like I have very little to add, and I really appreciate just you giving such a robust overview of like all of these topics and just a good historical perspective for everyone. So thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure. It's been my life, so I'm happy to speak on what I know and not on what I don't.
For sure. Yeah, just taking it back to the corner stores, and you were saying like sometimes people can take stuff and then come back and pay back the store owner or whatnot. And I've talked to Blair about this invisible communities. It's almost like a third space sometimes, like corner stores as well, or any liquor store. You know, um, I talk about invisible communities being there sometimes on paper, through media, through the news, or even sometimes reports through the local jurisdiction. You read on the Tenderloin, it might say, "Oh, crime rates, um, educational, below average compared to other neighborhoods, etc." But when you take away, sometimes like those filters that can put sometimes like a bad name on the community, there are working, um, healthy in the sense of like there's working communities that have trust within themselves, that might not show the same trust towards the greater jurisdiction, which might be the city of San Francisco or whatnot. So um, that's so interesting that you bring that up because I see that in the communities that I kind of grew up in. um, those invisible communities, people are comfortable walking down the sidewalks, shopping, just having fun. And again, it all falls back into community and trust. um, so I really like what you're talking about right now, the three pillars, the economic, or you said economic,
Public
economic,
health and
public health
community.
and community. Yeah. So, you know, um, yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Now, I want to learn a little bit about, or ask you. Um, it might be a two-parted question, but bringing it back to like your current position. How are like how are your locations like acquired or scouted? Is there some sort of land bank, or yeah, like just how I know you mentioned a little bit about the all the land you guys have available, but how do you guys like acquire them, or bring them to your program?
Yeah, so I mean, I wasn't a part of any of that happened prior to me. We're one site, so we're one 19-acre parcel,
Mm,
that was a vacant land that is entirely owned by the school district. Um, so we lease the land with them. We just signed a new 10-year lease this year, with an option to extend. Um, I think that it land access is one of the biggest challenges, especially when you're talking about urban farming, because you need a significant size of space, and when you're competing with financial interests, and right now Phoenix feels a lot like the Bay Area did maybe 10 years ago, where you're starting to see a lot more speculation and rise of condos and apartment buildings that are empty, and are being sold and changing hands for the speculation of what the value of them would be. um,
mhm,
so, if you have a 2-acre plot that could be a farm that produces, whatever, 10,000, 15, 20,000 pounds of food each year, or you could have, a 150 unit apartment building that's worth, 10 million or whatever. Like, that's a hard thing to compete with when there's limited space.
yeah.
But there is I mean, like I was saying, in Phoenix, there's a lot of underutilized land that is just vacant desert parcels that are mixed into neighborhoods, and even where there's commercial areas and downtown areas and stuff. There's a lot of vacant land because it is so sprawled out here. So the city has an effort that they're trying to look at ways that they can secure more public land. The school district has a lot of land that's also like vacant, and they're actually like a shrinking school district, and so they have in the past few years they've closed schools. Um, and so that's been a challenge. But there's not necessarily shortage of land, but I think that the challenge is, you know, how to make that economic incentive. And often, what happens, in other places is you try to go into like having a garden or a farm for temporary use, and then the landowner all of a sudden seems like, oh, the value is going up now because this is an attractive asset to the community. um, Now's the time to sell, and so let me kick all of this, all these farmers off. They're not going to sell them the land, right? To sell it to developers, and so that's a big challenge. Ideally, we don't have this program yet, but we'd be able to help facilitate uh, securing public land or securing long-term land rights for agricultural purposes, or ideally being able to have the farmers move towards ownership, or having like a conservation easement. That
Mhm,
if you can secure like an agricultural conservation easement, it's kind of like putting in a land trust that can be used only for that purpose. And so it has to be used for agricultural purposes and can't be sold to developers. So those are some strategies that are happening here. It's not really happening on a wide scale, and it's not set up so far where like a lot of farmers can get access to it. um, but there's interest of it happening. Phoenix just became one of the 5 areas in the United States that was deemed by the USDA to be a focus area for urban agriculture, and so they're building out like an urban agricultural center. There's a lot of the USDA offices here and the cooperative extension through the University of Arizona. They're trying to provide resources and trainings and loans and things like that. Um, but they're really also designed for normally larger farmers than what people can get access to in an urban space, and also for profit farmers. And so, if you're taking out a loan as a nonprofit, it can be hard to try to pay that back if you're not creating revenue, right? If you're running programs. And so, those are a lot of the dynamics that still need to get worked out. But in terms of our farm, uh, we have a little over 20 incubator farmers and farmer apprentices. The apprentices have an eighth of an acre. The incubators have largely a quarter acre, a half acre, and our largest farmer has an acre and a half on site.
For sure. And then like, you know, have you encountered any like obstacles with like municipalities or local governments? Like, I'm sure you have. So,
I mean, I have a lot more so in other roles. I mean, here it's been, I think there's less of a like spirit of collaboration um, than in the Bay Area. I think there's a lot more kind of like people are in kind of scarcity mindset and are not wanting to come together necessarily to see something flourish, but to see how they can be more connected to the benefits of it, right? And so that has been, I think, some challenges where trying to build community or trying to get people to come out, they're kind of more in their own little like silos, right? And so
Mhm.
um, that's a lot more of a challenge. But the interactions I've had have been supportive. It isn't necessarily like they're throwing money at it or trying to figure out how to create a system around it. Um, but, or at least I should say that the like decision makers aren't necessarily doing that in my experience. But I'm also new, so I haven't had a lot of interactions here as much in a lot of different scales of government and stuff. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot more that they could be doing. Like,
Mhm.
where I think there's a phenomenon called like desertification that a lot has to do with the more industrial monocropping, chemical fertilizer kind of based practices that actually kill the soil and will turn environments into deserts. And so will like they'll kill all the microbes. There's like a ridiculous amount of microbe and bacteria that's beneficial in even like a square inch of soil. And so when you kill that, the soil dies and plants can't grow in it anymore. And the way that the industrial system is used is fill more chemicals into that to replace the dead soil. Um, but as that phenomenon's happening everywhere, like, we're here in a desert that have live soils, but that's something that's spreading. And then also with climate change, the climate's getting hotter.
Yeah.
And so, Phoenix has an opportunity to serve as a model of how can you grow in these environments and how can you have, quality foods that are being produced um, that's setting a trend for, unfortunately, seemingly the direction that the world's going. And so 15, 20 years from now, what are other places going to look like? um, and I don't think that level of attention um, is here widespread.
For sure.
Mhm.
Just really quickly, Rogelio and I kind of talk about this a little bit. I sort of have an obsession with pest management, and as climate changes, obviously, how we deal with pests also needs to change. And I'm just wondering, in terms of agricultural practices, like, have you had to sort of pivot or kind of look more deeply into advanced techniques that help sort of mitigate pests with the sort of uncertainty of the climate?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to claim to be an expert by any means, because I've been more on the community side around food than farming. I know a little bit, um, but I think all the wisdom and the practices have been passed down for generations and generations of original peoples across the globe, and so everything that's happened isn't necessarily anything new, and cultures were able to deal with these things before chemicals and before um, Roundup and all these things. Um, so there's a lot of like companion plantings that you can do, and so you can plant something like marigolds, and that'll attract pests to them. There's also some types of plants that will like deter pests. Um,
Hmm.
I know that there's a lot of like interesting research around using mushrooms as a way to attract pests away from the crops that you're trying to deal with. And then also, when you're having these monocropped kind of row crop tractor plots that kill everything around it, you're also like dispersing the ecology, where what's referred to more like commonly as like permaculture or agroecology, which are really just more traditional indigenous practices of companion planting and interplanting different types of species that's more building a different type of an environment. You also see a more healthy ecosystem, right? And so there's always a balance that happens in food systems. And so you have predators and prey, right? So if you have things like gophers and moles and rats and what have you, then you also have hawks and owls and coyotes and stuff that start coming out and actually help manage that ecosystem. Um, so, I think that it's not just what we're doing, but how we're doing it, and really trying to look at our food system as a way to the role that we play in, nurturing the land, and the role that humans play in actually balancing an ecosystem, and stepping into some of those roles that might be lost. Like a lot of people like hate on hunting and stuff like that, but in a lot of places, deer and elk are like a huge invasive species because we don't have wolves anymore, and the wolves
Yeah.
don't keep the population in check. And so humans are having to step into that role, and can be done in a way that's very extractive and detrimental to the ecosystem, and can be done in a way that is restorative and helps keep things in balance and actually thrives. There's an amazing book, Braiding Sweetgrass, that if you haven't read, I would definitely recommend that. And she's a botanist and also an indigenous person, and was really looking at areas where humans were like harvesting healthily. The plants were stronger and the ecosystem was stronger because things aren't strangling each other out, and they're not competing each other out as much. And so we have a role to play in that, and I think that's really important.
Hmm. Very cool, man.
Awesome.
Damn.
Yeah. I just sort of am speechless. I'm learning how little I know sort of about this topic. And yeah, you've just really touched on so many important things and so many things that like haven't even entered into my mind at any point. So I really appreciate this dialogue so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Yeah. Although you say you're not an expert, and what you did say to us, it's like it just opened up, like it just opened up so much, avenues, even in my day to day work, things that I
Mm.
gotta maybe consider, look at, just a whole different lens on, what we're speaking about and what this episode is about. So again, Ryan, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm hoping it's inspiring. I think there's there's no more powerful act that we can take, is thinking about what we're consuming, and not just with food, but across the board, and what's our relationship with food, and what's our relationship with the land,
Yeah.
because that's what we're meant to have. And cities have, unfortunately, I think, put us into a place where we think that that is the normal, and the concrete and the asphalt
Hmm.
and all that, but it really disconnects us from that. And so I think the connection is really crucial.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
So
I know we kind of promised that we'd wrap things up within an hour, and so we're a little over an hour now, but yeah, I've really learned so much today, and I'm looking forward to kind of reflecting back on this conversation and listening to it again. I know our viewers will definitely be really excited about this topic. It intersects so many other topics, and it's something that, unless you're kind of in this space,
mhm,
maybe doesn't always get talked about enough. And so I really appreciate you kind of shedding light on the intricacies and sort of how it does overlap with, other areas
yeah,
of planning. I think it's important. It's important work you do. And yeah, thank you for everything that
yeah.
you've done over, your long but short professional career.
Thanks, Blair. I appreciate that. We didn't get to touch on archery.
Oh, I, I know, Ryan. We said like about an hour, but
Yeah, we if you don't
yeah,
mind,
can we?
yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
go ahead, Blair.
I have 18% left on my battery, and
Oh,
uh, that's the time I have. So we can go over it, but if it
18.
cuts out, it
Ooh,
might happen. I only have one plug that's also these front facing lights. So if I plug in my laptop, then I'm gonna have that light, and then I'll be
right.
all shadow. So
Oh well, Ryan. I hope I'm not like, providing a glare with with all the stuff over here, but nah. But yeah, can you talk a little? Or actually, Blair, go ahead. I know.
Yeah, no,
You
I
wanna?
wasn't sure if this was a new hobby of yours. Obviously, I feel like there's a strong connection to archery and sort of the land, and I just kind of wanted you to talk a little bit more about how you got into it and sort of yeah, like how does it sort of fit into your world?
Mhm.
yeah, it's become, I think, quite a practice for me. Um, I think I was always interested in it, and I got my bows are like right there, uh,
Cool.
but in more of a traditional practice, so like a long bow or a recurve, which is just pretty much a stick and a string. Was always interested in it, and never really had, I don't know, the interest or the courage or whatever to actually like embrace it. And then me and my brother started getting really big into this show called Alone. That's like a nature survival show where 10 people go out into the wilderness and they only have 10 items and they're all separate from each other, and whoever survives the longest wins. And all of them bring bows, and so they're out there, taking squirrels and deer sometimes, or what have you, but being able to like feed yourself with that as a skill set. It's something that really piqued my interest. um, and then had a friend who's a local hip-hop artist in the Bay, Kiwi. He started getting into it, and so through social media I started seeing that he was outgoing, and someone who grew up in the Bay Area, I didn't realize there's like 7 or 8 archery ranges, that are the outdoor ranges are almost like a golf course, but you go on like a hiking trail, and then you have like 30 targets over like 3 miles or something like that, and you're shooting the different targets and then hiking to the next one going one way. Um,
Wow.
that are all over, and they're like beautiful. There's one in the Oakland Hills and the redwoods, and there's one in Pacifica and the eucalyptus groves, and they're like all over. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to do this, and bought my first bow for like $150 and got some arrows. And it was COVID, so it was social distancing and all that kind of stuff was like a perfect activity for it. um, and just really became aligned with it. I'd love to be able to get to the point where I could hunt. I'm not really confident enough with that. It's really really hard. Shooting like a traditional bow is one of the most difficult skills I've or hobbies or whatever that I've tried to do. um, but it's this really, I think, amazing connection of like making sure that your body is in perfect alignment, that your mind is completely clear, um, and you're super focused on what you're doing. And so if any one of those things is off, like you're not going to be putting the arrow where you want it to be. But when it's all in alignment, and the arrow actually goes where you're trying to go, it's like a really satisfying feeling. And I've been doing like 3D tournaments that are like simulated hunting where you're shooting like an animal target, and you get points for that, and so that's really fun. There's like a whole community of folks that are around it. But yeah, like I try to do it at least once a week, and uh, go out, spend a couple hours. A great way to be outside and be active, and be in nature more, and also have this like physical kind of activity that is a skill that if needed, could potentially be a way to feed yourself.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So cool.
Very cool, bro.
Yeah.
I
Wow.
recommend everybody picking up a bow. It's in a safe way and learning how to do it, but it's really fun.
Yeah.
I tried bowling one time with my homie Fernando and Steven. It was on Rancho Cienega Park by Pico. There's like Fox Studios across the street,
Oh,
but it
cool.
was yeah, it was probably like a range. I'll say probably like I don't know, probably 30. It wasn't that far, but it had a bunch. It had like some haystacks, and you're
Uh-huh,
right.
uh-huh.
It requires alignment. You know, being calm, just concentration overall. Like I didn't hit the bullseye, but
Oh yeah.
yeah.
I don't hit it that often either. But yeah, I mean, just from like if you're pulling the string back to like here, or if
Yeah,
you're pulling the string back to here, like just that change, or even that change, right,
yeah.
completely changes the trajectory of the arrow, and you have your whole body to like if your shoulders like this or your shoulders like that, like it's all
Mm-hmm.
going to change everything. So you really got to be in tune with um, yourself.
Or yeah,
Yeah.
definitely
Yeah. Cool.
cool.
Yeah, I did a little bit of archery in middle school and I quickly
Oh,
became obsessed with it. Unfortunately, I didn't really keep at it, but just really appreciated sort of that mind body connection. And I think people probably typically wouldn't think that, it it's cardiovascular, but like oftentimes, just sort of depending on the nature of what you're doing, it can be. And just yeah, I'd love to get into it again at some point in my
Mm-hmm.
life. So
well,
cool.
California has some of the most number of outdoor ranges, and so I'm sure if you look it up, where you're at, there's places, and yeah, it's
Yeah.
super therapeutic and a great way to deal with stress and kind of get into like a meditative space too. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Cool.
Cool. Awesome.
Um,
Well, what a wonderful conversation.
yeah. Thanks for having me.
yeah,
I'm glad we could chop it up.
for sure. Oh, Ryan, one more thing, Ryan. Any
Sure.
advice for aspiring planners preparing to enter the school or the field or just trying to get involved?
Mm, yeah, I mean, I think that one I guess an important thing is really figuring out what your passion is around a city, right? And like cities are and urban spaces are these complex organisms, right? That are interconnecting, and transportation and open space and jobs, and like the possibilities of focusing on planning within an urban space is endless. Um, and so I think, to be good at it, you have to kind of follow your passion around it, and be willing to explore those spaces, and walk the city and really observe where things are happening and what those dynamics are that you don't see unless you're out there walking it. um, and really try to, I think, look at where the disparities are, and looking at like, why are nice parks in this one community but they're not in another, or why are there trash cans one place but they're not in another. Like, it really applies across the world of your imagination. There's probably going to be some disparities in low income communities and communities of color. And don't ever think that just because you have a good idea that it is the solution that works for the people that live there. And so if you're not involving those people, and maybe your idea is the best idea, and maybe it is the solution, but if the people who are living that experience don't see it that way, or it doesn't fit for them, then really it's just going to cause more problems. And so if you're not willing to go out and talk to people, and figure out how you can problem solve with them, it's the likelihood that it'll create more harm than good is pretty high. And I think for me, one of the reasons that everything clicked for urban planning was like, humans created these problems, right? And cities are a place where there's no more like clear picture of how decisions are made, because everything has been a decision that's made, right? none of that is natural. Where the streets are, where they're not, where the plumbing goes, where not, PG&E and the California fires, right? Like, are the lines overground or underground, right? Like, these are all kind of things that are decisions. Um, and so different decisions can address those problems and can create solutions. But the problems existed because the people that were making the decision of where the freeway was going to go, or where the school was going to go, or where the park was going to go, was largely done along racial lines and economic lines, and were done to benefit, largely white communities and communities that had economic purchasing power, and you know, underdevelop low income communities and communities of color. And until we can find that balance, we're not going to have like a healthy ecosystem within our cities.
For sure. Thank you, bro. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, we good?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Hard. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Keep doing the work, keep showing up, keep being awesome.
And like always, sending you good vibes.